Well, today I thought I would take the opportunity to add a cactus-shaped cookie jar to our growing cookie jar collection. Stay tuned and see how fun and easy this is to make. Alright, just like all the rest of our cookie jars, we are starting with a piece of cardstock that I have cut 3/4 of an inch wide by about 4 inches long. I'm going to pre-wrap it around this Sharpie, or this is actually a Bic marker, Sharpie works, whatever you've got that's about that diameter. And then I like to go through here and make a mark so that I've got the circumference of my pen marked. I don't want glue on this portion here that's going to touch the pen. I want glue only where it's not going to touch the pen. And I'm using a nice thick tacky glue. The secret to this is making sure you have a really thick tacky glue, or a really thick glue. And try and get your glue all the way to the edges of your paper. You really want this to adhere well so that it stays, because once this glue dries, we are going to be putting this in the oven, and we don't want the glue to let go. The thicker glue and the fact that we're letting it dry all the way, it will soak into the paper, and I have not had any trouble with these. I'm putting some glue on the outside of that other end. That way I know I've got that inside edge all the way glued. Now, we want to go really as tight as we can and as straight as we can with this step. And then slide it off your pen so that it doesn't adhere to your pen. And now this needs to set aside and dry all the way. When this glue is dry, I'll come back and we will start building our cookie jar. Alright, so my glue has dried now. So now it's time to cover that with some clay. And I like to do the first layer of clay, even though the outside is not going to be white. I like to start with a layer of white clay. And this is original Sculpey. I do that use it for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's a lot cheaper and we're really not seeing much of this. So I don't need to be able to do details. I don't need to have a clay that, you could even pull white clay that's gotten some dirt into it, like this has got some odd things in it, because it's not going to show much. We'll see a little tiny bit of it at the very bottom of the cookie jar, and occasionally we see some at the very rim when the lid is off. But for that little tiny bit that we'll see, I'm fine with using maybe my white clay that's not quite in as good a shape as I would like. So I'm going to cut a straight line there. I've rolled it out just as thin as I can because I don't want to add a lot of bulk to this, but I do want to add the layer of clay, which will make it easier to work with later. So let's get this so it's peeling up off the work surface. I'm going to cut a nice smooth line. And now I've got my TLS, Translucent Liquid Sculpey, which is our glue. We are going to put this here. And we're just going to roll this thin strip of clay around our cookie jar base. Cut it up. And I want to cut this and pull it together so that I have one layer of clay. I don't want to double it there. Roll it to kind of get it in a better contact. cut it off even. And I do this, I mean, I probably vary my approach to this a tiny bit from month to month when I make these cookie jars. And the thing you can take away from that is you do what works best for you. If you watched me do a cookie jar a month or two ago, or one of my other cookie jars in the playlist, and you notice, oh, she did that differently that time. Well, I do what feels right at the moment, and sometimes that means I vary my approach just a little bit, and that's okay. The thing you can take away from that is do what works for you. All right, so I'm making a base now that's covering the bottom, and I'll need to cut this off even with the edges. And since I am attaching wet clay to, or raw clay to raw clay, I don't need the TLS for this step. We only need that when we're putting raw clay onto something other than raw clay. And it's okay if that bottom doesn't remain completely flat too. So now I'm going to take some clay. I'm going to make a wad. And then a cane. I'm going to cut the end off. Try and get this round again. And make sure it's going to fit inside. Nope, that's too fat. And what this will be is what we are, the base we are going to build our lid on. There, that fits inside just fine. So now I want to cut the end smooth again, which means since this is soft, I'll need to roll it just a little bit. And then I want about a 1/4 inch thick piece of this. So now all of this needs to go into my oven. I'm going to bake it at the recommended temperature for the clay I'm using, and I'm going to bake for 10 minutes and then allow it to cool to room temperature before we go on to the next step. So I'll be right back. All right, my cookie jar and its lid base are both baked and cooled to room temperature. So now it's time to start working on the outside, and I'm going to use this green. It's just a random green. I looked online at cactus shaped cookie jars, and they come in all different colors. This was a nice soft clay, so I felt like working with it today. But you could use any green you like. It can be dark, it can be light. These things, it looks like these cookie jars, even the vintage ones, come in a variety of colors. And what I'm trying to do here is get it rolled out pretty thin, because I don't want to add a lot of bulk to the cookie jar. That is one of the biggest problems I have when I make these, and I fail at it, is when I try to add too thick of layers of clay. Then it gets too bulky and it doesn't look right. So I've got this rolled out. I'm going to use my knife to help me peel it up off of my tray, off of my tile. And once again, we are going to cut a strip that will cover our cookie jar, and we're going to coat this again in TLS, because once again we are attaching raw clay to something that's not raw clay. In this case, we're attaching it to our baked clay. You don't need a huge amount of TLS, but you need enough to make a nice coat. Let's see if we can get this rolled up. And there's a couple of ways to add our texture to our outside of our cookie jar. And I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to try a couple of things here. Come on. What is that? Now, did I have a small piece of clay that was underlapping? Oh, come on. It's okay if it's not really neat, because we can neaten it up as we work. And I think I'm just going to leave the bottom of my cookie jar white this time. I'm not going to cover it with the green clay. But I do want to get this cut off even with the top. That's a pretty even coverage. Now, let's see if I can get this off of my fingers. Now, you could definitely make yours more defined or, less. It's up to you. Now, I'm going to roll a snake of the same green clay because we need to make those little branches. I rolled that part too skinny, so I'm just going to do that. All right, now on the real cookie jar, these stick out a little bit more than I think I'm going to have them on my miniature one, simply because I think it will be too fragile to have them sticking out very far. Take a clay tool. Come on. Go. Now try and get the end of that rounded off. And let's see if we can get that little dab of whatever that is that's on my clay off of it. All right, now I'll put this on here. This will give me a little bit more stable of a surface. And I'm going to start on what will be the back of my cookie jar. I know it's the back because there's my seam. And I'm just going to make it sticking to me. Okay, it's time for cornstarch. There we go. Now it won't be sticking to me as much. Just make a few lines here and there. Doesn't have to be perfect. There, sit. Okay, I can define that a little more off camera because right now it's just trying to argue with me. So now I need to make a small, kind of a half ball shape that will become our lid. I'm going to get enough clay that I can make it a ball. This in here. I'm kind of eyeballing this right now. See if it's how well I did. And that looks pretty darn good. Okay, so that will be our lid. Let's go ahead and put it on and kind of line these lines up. Let's get that smush down just a little more so that it's a little flatter and a little bigger around. Make sure I'm still on camera. And these lines don't need to come all the way to the top because we are going to add another piece to the lid after this part bakes. Now, I am going to take a small amount of TLS, put in the center, put this little plug that we cut and put it right in the middle. And now these pieces need to be baked at recommended temperature for about 10 minutes. When that is done, I'll come back and we'll move on to the next step. Alright, so our cookie jar and our lid are baked. And now I've got just a little bit of pink clay because most of these that I saw online, of these little antique, mostly the little cookie jars I saw that were the cactuses that were shaped kind of like this were antiques, and most of them had a little pink flower on the top. So I'm just going to do a really simple pink flower. This is just a really pale pink polymer clay. I'm not sure what it is. Like a lot of my clays, it's just a random one that I had in my stash. And the color doesn't really matter. It's just get something that's kind of that color. And I did do a little bit of making that a little bit more neat on that lid before I put it in the oven. And we're just going to put that there. Now it can go on the top, it could go on the side, anywhere you want it. So I am going to go put this in the oven for 10 minutes and then we can put a clear finish on and see how our cookie jar looks. Alright, now these pieces are both baked and cooled. I did take my ball tool and just kind of make a divot in the top of the flower. I thought it made it look a little bit more like a flower. And you could definitely leave that off. You could put a different color on, whatever. So now that they're baked and cooled, I'm going to take some of my gloss Mod Podge that Plaid sent me so nicely, and I'm going to put a very, very thin coat. Remember, make sure that these are cooled to room temperature. And make sure that when you're putting on gloss Mod Podge especially, that you use a very thin coat, because Mod Podge, especially the glossier the finish, it tends to remain sticky. And I've had that happen not only on polymer clay, but on paper and wood also. So for the gloss, especially gloss one, make sure it's a very thin coat. And then we're just going to go ahead and coat this. So I'm going to put a thin coat on here. I'll let it dry, and then we'll come back and we'll look at our finished cookie jar. All right, here's our finished little cactus shaped cookie jar. I hope you enjoyed today's project. If you did, be sure and hit the like button. Leave me a comment. What theme of cookie jar would you like to see in future videos? Let me know so I can figure out how to make one. And also be sure and check the blog post for photos and more details. If you enjoy my content and haven't subscribed, hit the subscription button and the notification bell so you know when I put up a new video. Thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye.